Welcome to the Eclipse Committer Training video series. In these videos, we discuss certain key elements of life as a committer on an Eclipse project. In this video, we're going to talk about starting a new open source project at the Eclipse Foundation. Starting an Eclipse project. Before we get started, we should try to clear up a bit of terminology. The word project is overloaded. When we use the term project, we tend to mean an Eclipse open source project. Where possible, we try to use the full term Eclipse open source project to mitigate confusion. The GitLab and GitHub worlds also use the word project. Even though the term is not entirely accurate, we often use the word repository to refer to GitLab and GitHub projects. Eclipse open source projects may have more than one repository, and may have a mixture of repositories, with some of them on GitLab and some of them on GitHub. Whether or not such a combination is desirable is a matter left to the project team and the communities that they support. The team of developers who have the necessary privileges to modify project resources are referred to as committers. In the GitLab and GitHub worlds, these committers manifest as a team with the necessary privileges to push directly to the repository, accept merge and pull requests, and so on. Contrast the notion of an Eclipse open source project with a GitLab or GitHub project. In the GitLab and GitHub worlds, a project is the aggregation of a single repository, a single issue tracker, a single wiki, and so on. A GitLab or GitHub project that is owned by an Eclipse open source project has a team with the necessary privileges to push content directly to the repository, accept merge and pull requests, resolve issues, and so on. Only committers from the Eclipse open source project will have these privileges. We discussed this more in the Eclipse Projects and Git video. As I mentioned previously, we try to consistently qualify our use of the word project to mitigate against confusion. When we talk about GitLab and GitHub projects, we tend to refer to them as repositories, even though that's not entirely accurate. So, what is an Eclipse open source project? An open source project is the main operational unit for open source software development at the Eclipse Foundation. An Eclipse project has a team of committers and resources that it uses to implement its scope and goals. Pragmatically, an Eclipse project, or more specifically an Eclipse project team, implements the Eclipse Foundation development process and Eclipse intellectual property policy. An Eclipse project calls itself an Eclipse project and conforms to the Eclipse Foundation's trademarks and branding guidelines. An Eclipse project operates in a vendor-neutral manner, implementing the open source rules of engagement as described in the Eclipse Foundation development process. That is, an Eclipse open source project operates in an open, transparent, and meritocratic manner. Finally, an Eclipse project uses infrastructure provided and managed by the Eclipse Foundation for all its core content. Core content includes source code, issues, and primary communication channels. I'll reinforce that source code is considered core content, and so it is a hard requirement that Eclipse open source projects use infrastructure provided by the Eclipse Foundation for Git repositories. Eclipse open source projects are organized hierarchically, with top-level projects at the top. Top-level projects can be thought of as primarily organizational, with Eclipse open source projects being the operational unit where the real work happens. Top-level projects have a charter that defines their mission and scope, along with a collection of open source projects that implement their mission. Eclipse open source projects align with exactly one top-level project. Eclipse open source projects do not have a charter. Rather, they have a scope that aligns with the scope and mission of their top-level project. Top-level projects also have a Project Manager Committee, or PMC. The role of the PMC is to work with the open source projects to implement the mission of the top-level project and help the open source projects operating under their purview be successful with the Eclipse Foundation development process and intellectual property policy. As part of the project leadership chain, the PMC acts in the role of liaison between the open source project teams and the Eclipse Management Organization. The roles of the PMC and the Eclipse Management Organization, or EMO, are discussed in the Eclipse Project Roles video. Eclipse open source projects move through various phases. All Eclipse open source projects start in the pre-proposal phase. During this phase, the project team assembles a proposal that describes the various aspects of the future open source project. During the pre-proposal phase, the project proposal is kept confidential while the project team assembles information and coordinates with the EMO. A project proposal is only made publicly available for community review when the project team is ready. While the proposal is private, anybody who is listed as a committer has read access to the document. The author, and anybody listed as a project lead, have write access to the document. Note that no links to the proposal are available while it is still private. Be sure to bookmark it so that you can find it again. Once made public, the proposal is open for community review and comments. Following a community review period, the EMO engages in a creation review, and, upon successful completion of the review, the project is created and its resources are provisioned. At this point, the open source project is in the incubation phase and ready for the project team to move any existing code into the Eclipse project, establish builds, and generally learn the ins and outs of the Eclipse Foundation development process and the intellectual property due diligence process. The incubation phase serves as an opportunity for the Eclipse project team to learn how to operate as an Eclipse open source project, but also serves to inform the community that the project is on a path to becoming a fully functioning Eclipse open source project, but may not be quite there yet. An Eclipse open source project will leave the incubation phase following a successful graduation review and spend most of its existence in the mature phase. Eclipse open source projects are encouraged to engage in the release process defined by the Eclipse Foundation development process during the incubation phase. While we don't have specific restrictions regarding how releases are named, it's considered best practice to name the first release after graduation into the mature phase as 1.0, and all releases previous to that as 0. something. Once made publicly viewable, the proposal will be available for community review for a minimum of 2 weeks. The community review period provides a means for community members to review the project proposal and ask questions. The proposal can be updated during the community review period. The project team may choose to add additional committers or interested parties, or tweak various aspects of the proposal. During that community review period, the EMO will ensure that the necessary pieces are in place to be ready for creation. When all of the pieces are in place, and a minimum of 2 weeks has passed, the EMO will initiate a creation review. The creation review runs for 1 week. The proposal is locked down from change during the creation review period. This period is the last chance for the community and membership of the Eclipse Foundation to speak up and voice their concerns regarding the project. Eclipse open source projects typically spend between 3 and 6 months in incubation before engaging in a 1-week graduation review to enter the mature phase. Eclipse open source projects start with a proposal. The link to create a new proposal document is shown here. The proposal document can be saved while incomplete. You can return later to provide additional information. The proposal document provides a means to capture fundamental information about the future project and share it with stakeholders, including the community at large. A project proposal contains numerous fields that each capture some aspect of the proposal. What we're looking for is enough information to describe the proposal to a generally knowledgeable individual who may not be immediately familiar with the specific focus of the project. Ideally, provide a few sentences in each section. We take particular interest in the scope. The scope is all about the bounds of the project, what is to be accomplished and produced by the project. The scope may also lay out what is not going to be worked on or created. Think of the description as a non-technical pitch of the project. Make the first paragraph of the description an elevator pitch. How would you describe your project if you only had 15 seconds to make somebody want to learn more and have a closer look? Use present tense for the scope and the description. That is, describe the nature of the project as though the Eclipse open source project already exists. Make the scope and description make sense 6 months and 6 years after the project has been created. We also take particular interest in the project leads and committers. Specifically, we expect a project proposal to list more than 1 or 2 committers. There's no exact number of committers that we're looking for, as the right number of committers varies considerably based on the nature of the project, but the number is generally greater than 2. Ideally, committers should also represent diverse interests. That is, committers should ideally come from more than one company. We recognize, however, that starting a project with committers representing diverse interests is hard, and that the project itself, once it comes into existence, will be the best means of growing diversity. That is, growing diversity can be a goal during incubation. When the proposal is ready to be moved from draft to community review, send a note to the EMO with your request. The proposal form has a couple of idiosyncrasies with regard to project leads. Project lead is a distinct role. Anybody that you list as a project lead must also be listed as a committer. The more interesting idiosyncrasy is that the means by which you specify project leads requires that anybody listed as a project lead must already have an Eclipse Foundation account and must have used that account to log into projects.eclipse.org at least once. That is, the project.eclipse.org system needs to know about you if you're to be listed as a project lead. Since it is very often the future project lead who creates the proposal, this isn't commonly a problem. The warnings block at the top of the proposal page will let you know what's missing, or must be done before we can create the project. These issues should be resolved during the community review. We can start a creation review with some missing information, but the issues need to be resolved before we can declare the creation review successful and continue to provisioning the project resources. When the proposal is ready and the project team is ready to go public, we start publicly tracking the process. This is the EMO's process. We initiate all of these activities. The timing of the start of review events is coordinated with the project team. We track the progress of proposals using issues on our GitLab instance. While the proposal is in draft mode and accessible only to the project team, the tracking issue remains confidential to the EMO only. When the proposal is opened for community review, the tracking issue is also made publicly accessible. As I stated earlier, the timing of the transition of the proposal from draft to community review is coordinated with the project team. After the proposal is opened for community review, the EMO initiates several concurrent activities. We engage with our trademarks team to verify that the name of the project does not violate existing trademarks and is otherwise suitable as a project name. Note that we do not typically attempt to register all project names as trademarks of the Eclipse Foundation. If registering the name is important to you, contact the EMO for assistance. We ensure that the project license is compatible with the goals of the project, get acknowledgement from the PMC that they will accept responsibility for caring for the new project, and capture as much information as we can about the nature of the resources that the project requires. After a minimum of 2 weeks of community review, we start the project creation process. The tracking issue describes the process and provides pointers into the documentation. You'll notice that we include a lot of information and several checklists on the issue. The checklists are primarily intended as a means for the EMO to keep track of what we need to have in place before we can create the Eclipse open source project. It is generally the EMO that ticks these boxes and manages the life cycle of these issues, but we will interact with the project team via comments while the process is in progress. Following the successful completion of the creation review, all of the committers listed on the proposal are sent an email with instructions for completing their committer agreements. Shortly after at least one committer completes their agreement, the Eclipse IT team will provision project resources, including mailing lists, Git repositories, and so forth. As additional committers complete their agreements, they are added to the project team and will gain committer-level access to the project resources. It is only after we have the completed agreements in place that committers will appear on the project's committer list and as members of the teams on GitLab and GitHub. Note that if your project uses GitHub, all committers must provide their GitHub ID in their Eclipse Foundation account. We need this information to invite them to the teams in the corresponding GitHub organizations. With committers and resources provisioned, the Eclipse open source project is then ready for the initial contribution of code. The initial contribution is the first, or initial, contribution of content to the project. As part of our intellectual property due diligence process, the Eclipse Foundation's intellectual property team will review the project code. You'll be given instructions on how to engage in this process by the EMO. With content moved over into repositories managed by the Eclipse Foundation, you'll be ready to start setting up builds and generally making open source magic happen. Note that when you move your project to the Eclipse Foundation, it becomes an Eclipse project. Specifically, it ceases to be your project and becomes a vendor-neutral community project that operates under the governance of the Eclipse Foundation. This means, for example, that the open source project name and the names of any products produced by the project will be trademarks, either registered or common law, of the Eclipse Foundation, and you are required to follow the same trademark guidelines as everybody else when you refer to the project. If you were to, for example, contribute the Woolsey product to the Eclipse Foundation, you would be required to transfer all rights that you have to the name Woolsey to the Eclipse Foundation, and the use of the Woolsey name in your product's website, marketing materials, etc. would be then subject to the trademark guidelines. You would be required to rename your products from Woolsey to My Product for Eclipse Woolsey, or something similar. If the original name is important to your organization, consider choosing a different name for the Eclipse open source project. For more information, look for the rest of this video series at eclipse.org/projects/training. The Eclipse Foundation Project Handbook at eclipse.org/projects/handbook contains a great deal of practical information for committers. Or contact the EMO directly by email if you need help.